Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to sift through that constant flood of global news and science.
Yeah, the launches, the breakthroughs, the geopolitical shifts.
Exactly, and boil it all down into something clear, something useful, really, just for you.
And today's sources, they really show this incredible contrast, don't they? On one hand, you have just breathtaking speed in science.
Yeah, like finding the brain's own off switch for chronic pain, which we'll get into.
Or, successfully wrapping up the V2 tests for Starship, a rocket literally designed for Mars. It's astounding.
But then you look elsewhere and it feels like molasses. You see this real friction globally.
Absolutely. Escalating trade disputes between major powers, governments actually seizing tech companies.
Which is pretty unprecedented.
It really is. And then you've got deep political instability bubbling up in different regions. It feels like living in two different worlds sometimes.
Or two different centuries, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. So our mission today, as always, is to sort of navigate that whole spectrum for you.
We've got a really packed stack of material, biomedical stuff that could genuinely change how we age, how we feel pain.
Updates on space tech, AI hardware, the engines driving the future.
And then the geopolitical side, trade, security, some really complex diplomatic situations.
Plus shifts in the economy and some sobering news on environmental tipping points, too.
It's definitely a lot to cover, but we're here to connect those dots for you. Make sure you leave feeling like you've got a handle on it all.
So where should we start? Maybe with that inner frontier, the human body.
Sounds good. Let's dive into these biomedical breakthroughs, starting with that pain management discovery. It sounds potentially revolutionary. Okay, so pain relief. For years, it's been dominated by opioids, right? With all the terrible risks we know about.
Exactly. The dependency, the overdose crisis. Yeah. It's cast a long shadow.
But this new research, it's found something the body does naturally. An off button, as some are calling it.
That's the headline, yeah.
Yeah.
It's more nuanced, of course. Researchers identified specific neurons, nerve cells,
Right.
that can produce a molecule naturally inside the body that acts like a painkiller.
So not an external drug, but something we make ourselves.
Precisely. An endogenous painkiller, made right where it's needed, potentially. This changes the game from relying solely on external drugs for chronic pain.
How is it different fundamentally from something like morphine? Why wouldn't it have the same risks?
Well, the mechanism seems different. Synthetic opioids like morphine or fentanyl, they mainly hit what's called the mu-opioid receptor.
Okay.
That receptor is great for blocking pain, but it's also linked to the euphoria, the breathing problems, the tolerance,
Yeah.
the addiction pathway.
Got it.
These natural substances the body makes, they seem to interact with the pain signaling pathways differently, maybe more subtly. They boost the body's own pain dampening systems without apparently triggering that full addictive response tied to the mu receptor.
Wow. So the potential to manage severe chronic pain without creating dependency,
Yeah.
that's enormous.
It really is monumental. You're talking about tackling the root of chronic pain, that persistent, sometimes amplified signaling by potentially helping the body regulate itself better.
Making the treatment more about restoring balance than just blocking symptoms. Regenerative, almost.
So that's the hope. Regenerative rather than purely palliative. It's a very different approach.
Okay, sticking with regeneration, let's move from pain to actually rebuilding parts of the body. Stem cells are always huge news.
And this update is about speed and efficiency. Scientists used a lab-grown human embryo model.
Now, just to clarify for listeners, this isn't a viable embryo, right? It's a model derived from stem cells.
Exactly. It's a model system created purely from stem cells to mimic very early development. And using this model, they got it to produce functional blood stem cells.
The cells that create our blood and immune system.
Correct. And they did it in just 4 days.
4 days! That seems incredibly fast. Why is that speed such a big deal?
Well, think about treatments for things like leukemia or sickle cell anemia now. Finding a matched bone marrow donor or cord blood. It's complex, it takes time. Sometimes you never find a match.
Right. The matching is the bottleneck.
It is. This suggests a future where maybe, instead of searching for a donor, you could grow the patient's own perfectly matched blood stem cells in a lab in under a week.
That would completely change the game for blood disorders, immune deficiencies.
Absolutely. It could make regenerative therapy for these conditions much faster, potentially universally available. A huge leap.
Okay, so that's blood. What about the brain? There's regenerative work happening there too, using vitamin K, but like a modified version.
Yeah, supercharged vitamin K is a good way to think about it. They're working with synthetic vitamin K analogs. Basically, vitamin K molecules they've tweaked in the lab, often by adding retinoic acid.
And regular vitamin K is already important for the brain, isn't it?
It is. It plays a role. But these modified versions, these analogs, seem to be dramatically better at promoting neurogenesis.
Neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons.
Exactly. New brain cells.
And the link to Alzheimer's, how does that work? Is it about getting past the blood-brain barrier?
That's a critical part of it, yes. The blood-brain barrier is notoriously protective. It keeps most things out. But these analogs seem quite good at crossing it.
Okay, so they get into the brain. Then what?
Once they're inside, they activate a specific receptor called mGlu1. This receptor is really important for things like synaptic plasticity, how connections between neurons change, and memory formation.
Which are things heavily affected by Alzheimer's.
Precisely. So, by stimulating this receptor, the idea is to move towards treatments that don't just manage symptoms, but might actually help repair or regrow neural connections damaged by the disease. It's about active regeneration in the brain.
That's fascinating. And sticking with the brain, but shifting to diagnosis, there's this discovery about a hidden pulse in the brain using very advanced imaging.
Yes, this required a special type of MRI, a 7 Tesla MRI, or 7T MRI.
Which is much more powerful than standard hospital MRIs.
Much more powerful. Standard ones are usually 1.5 or 3 Tesla. 7T gives you incredibly high resolution. Think microscopic detail versus a blurry overview.
And what did this super detailed view reveal, these pulses?
It allowed researchers to actually see and measure, non-invasively, the tiny microscopic pulsations of blood vessels deep inside the brain. These little throbs happen with every heartbeat.
And these pulses are important. They do something.
They're thought to be essential for the glymphatic system. That's kind of like the brain's waste disposal system. It clears out metabolic junk while we sleep.
Okay, so a healthy pulse helps clear waste. What happens when it's not healthy?
Well, the researchers observed that these pulsations get significantly stronger as people age. And they get even stronger in people with vascular risk factors like high blood pressure.
Stronger is bad. That seems counterintuitive.
In this case, yes. An overly strong, maybe irregular pulse seems to disrupt that gentle rhythmic flow needed for waste clearance. Instead of helping wash away things like amyloid plaques, the ones linked to Alzheimer's, it might actually hinder the process or even cause damage.
So, measuring this pulse could be an early warning sign for Alzheimer's risk, linked to vascular health.
That's exactly the implication. It provides a potential new biomarker, a way to spot trouble brewing years before cognitive symptoms become obvious. And it really underscores that strong link between the health of your blood vessels and your risk of neurodegenerative disease. Early diagnosis, earlier intervention.
Right. Okay, now, shifting from hope and potential to a more cautionary note. There's a common drug, finasteride, used for hair loss and prostate issues, and the sources are raising serious mental health concerns.
Yes, this is concerning because it's so widely prescribed. The data being highlighted connects finasteride use in some individuals to really severe mental health side effects.
Like what specifically?
We're talking about significant depression, persistent anxiety, and even in some reported cases, suicidal thoughts or actions.
That's incredibly serious. But the controversy isn't just that side effects exist, right? It's about how regulators are handling the reports.
That seems to be the core issue highlighted by experts like Professor Mayer Breesis. The criticism is aimed squarely at regulatory bodies, like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S.
Right.
The argument is that these agencies haven't acted strongly enough. They haven't adequately updated warning labels or maybe considered restricting access, despite years of accumulating evidence.
Evidence like what? Patient reports? Studies?
Both. Post-marketing surveillance data, thousands of individual patient reports detailing these psychiatric problems, and published studies exploring the link.
So the accusation is basically that regulators are slow-walking the response, maybe prioritizing the drug's availability over acknowledging these potentially devastating risks for some users.
That's the essence of the critique, yes. Especially when you consider the sheer volume. You mentioned 7 million prescriptions in the U.S. in 2023 alone, often for something cosmetic like hair loss.
Right.
The argument is that the risk-benefit calculation looks very different when you factor in these severe, potentially irreversible psychological harms, even if they only affect a subset of users. The regulatory framework, critics say, isn't keeping up with the real-world data on these specific risks.
A really sobering reminder about unintended consequences. Okay, let's wrap this segment by going back to the heart. There's a study identifying a specific culprit that causes problems after someone survives a heart attack.
Yes, this focuses on the dangerous period following a heart attack when patients are at high risk of sudden cardiac death.
Okay.
And the study points the finger at a specific protein. It's called resistin-like molecule gamma, or RELMI for short.
RELMI. And it's part of our immune system.
It is. Normally, it's involved in fighting off infections, part of the body's defense team.
So why does it turn bad after a heart attack? What does it do to the heart?
Well, after a heart attack, there's massive inflammation. The immune system rushes in to clean up the damaged tissue. But RELMI seems to go rogue in this process. It physically attacks the membranes of the surviving heart muscle cells. It essentially punches tiny holes or channels into them.
That sounds bad. Very bad.
It is. These holes disrupt the delicate electrical balance needed for the heart cells to coordinate and beat properly. It destabilizes the whole system.
Creating electrical chaos, leading to arrhythmias.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It triggers dangerous, fast, chaotic heart rhythms, specifically ventricular arrhythmias. These are often the direct cause of sudden cardiac death after a heart attack.
Is there direct evidence linking RELMI to this?
The evidence from the study, which used a mouse model, was striking. When they genetically engineered mice so they couldn't produce RELMI and then induced heart attacks.
What happened?
They saw a 12-fold reduction in those life-threatening arrhythmias compared to normal mice. 12-fold.
Wow, that's a massive difference.
It really is. It strongly suggests that blocking RELMI could be a completely new way to protect patients after a heart attack, shifting focus from just restoring blood flow to actively managing this damaging immune response.
Fascinating. So much happening just within our own bodies. Okay, let's pivot now from the inner frontier to the outer one space. Technology, AI. All right, let's head for the stars. SpaceX's Starship, the biggest rocket aiming for the moon and Mars. It just hit a milestone.
It did. Sources confirm the 11th test flight was a success, and that basically concludes what SpaceX calls the Starship V2 era.
V2 era done. And this last flight, it nailed some key objectives, like the landing burn.
Yeah, they tested an upgraded landing burn profile, and critically, they achieved the Raptor engine relight in space.
Okay, the engine relight. Why is that specific maneuver such a big deal for their ambitions of Mars, the moon?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
Being able to reliably restart the Raptor engines in the vacuum of space is non-negotiable for several things.
Like what?
First, you need it to perform the burn that puts the Starship into orbit after it separates from the booster. Second, and maybe even more importantly, you absolutely need it for the landing burn, whether that's coming back to Earth or, crucially, landing precisely on a moon or Mars.
Without the relight, you can't land softly, basically.
Exactly. No relight means no reusability, no interplanetary capability. It's a linchpin technology.
So looking back at V2, 11 flights, 6 successes, 5 failures, that feels like incredibly fast development. Lots of learning by doing, or perhaps learning by exploding sometimes?
That's definitely the SpaceX philosophy. Rapid iteration, test, learn, fix, fly again. And it seems to be yielding results.
So what's next? They're moving to V3, Block 3 and Block 4 models. What's the goal there?
Yeah, the V3 era, starting with these Block 3 and 4 vehicles, is all about scaling up capability and meeting the specific demanding requirements of NASA, that's the National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
For the Artemis moon missions, right. Starship is the lander.
Correct. It is the human landing system for Artemis. So these next versions need more thrust, probably using lighter but stronger materials, and a big jump in payload capacity. They're aiming for over 150 metric tons to LEO low Earth orbit.
150 tons, that's huge.
It is. And that kind of capacity and reliability is essential not just for landing astronauts on the moon, but also for eventually building the infrastructure you'd need for any kind of long-term presence on Mars.
Okay, so bigger rockets going higher. But closer to home, in that low Earth orbit you mentioned, things are getting crowded, especially because of Starlink.
That's the other side of the coin, yeah. A new study is raising some serious flags about the sheer density of satellites, particularly Starlink, in LEO.
What's the risk? Just traffic jams.
It's worse than traffic jams. It's the risk of collisions. As density increases, the probability of satellites hitting each other or hitting existing debris goes up dramatically.
Leading to more debris. A chain reaction.
That's the nightmare scenario, often called the Kessler syndrome, a cascade of collisions creating so much debris that certain orbits become essentially unusable, maybe for generations. We're not there yet, but the study warns we're heading in a risky direction.
And yet we also hear about Starlink satellites falling back to Earth quite regularly, like 5 a day. That sounds alarming too.
It does sound alarming, but it's actually part of the plan. It's mostly intentional.
Intentional falling, how does that work?
These satellites have a limited lifespan. At the end of their useful life, they're designed to use their remaining fuel to lower their orbit, so they burn up harmlessly in the atmosphere, usually over remote parts of the ocean. It's an end-of-life disposal protocol.
So it's actually mitigating space debris, not adding to it.
Exactly. It's responsible space traffic management.
Yeah.
Now, there's a complicating factor.
Which is?
Solar activity. The sun is currently near its peak activity level, the solar maximum.
Right.
When the sun's very active, it heats up Earth's upper atmosphere, causing it to expand outward, sort of puff up.
Okay.
That expanded atmosphere creates more drag on satellites and LEO, pulling them down faster than they otherwise would.
Ah, so the sun is actually accelerating this deorbiting process for some satellites.
Correct. So while the deorbiting itself is planned and necessary to keep LEO cleaner in the long run, the current high rate, potentially up to 5 a day, is partly driven by this natural solar cycle speeding things up.
Fascinating interaction. Okay, let's come back down to Earth. The AI race. It feels like it's all about computing power right now, and there's a huge deal between OpenAI and Broadcom.
A massive deal. The sources talk about OpenAI securing 10 gigawatts of AI accelerator hardware from Broadcom.
10 gigawatts. Can you put that into perspective? How much power is that?
It's enormous. Think about the continuous power output of several large nuclear power plants. That's the scale of energy required just for the hardware to run these massive AI models.
Wow. It really highlights that energy itself is becoming a bottleneck for AI growth, not just the algorithms.
Absolutely. Energy and specialized hardware.
So why Broadcom specifically? Is OpenAI trying to move away from NVIDIA, the current dominant player?
That seems to be a major driver, yes. Reducing dependency on a competitor like NVIDIA is strategically smart, but it's also about developing custom chips.
Tailor-made for OpenAI's models.
Exactly. Partnering with Broadcom allows them to design and build AI accelerators, optimized specifically for their large language models, their specific needs. This kind of vertical integration, designing your own chips, is a huge trend. It is about maximizing performance, efficiency, and ultimately control over your core technology.
Makes sense. And this AI integration, it's reaching into everyday life now, even shopping, Walmart, and OpenAI.
Yeah, they've formalized a partnership. You can now link your Walmart account directly to ChatGPT.
What does that let you do?
It enables what you might call seamless conversational commerce. Imagine telling the chatbot, hey, I need groceries for dinner, maybe something keto-friendly.
Okay.
ChatGPT could then suggest recipes, check inventory at your local Walmart for the ingredients, build your cart, and potentially even guide you right through checkout, all within the chat window.
So you never leave the chatbot to do your shopping?
That's the idea. It's a very aggressive integration, using AI to make the path from thinking about buying something to actually buying it as smooth and quick as possible.
And speaking of streamlining, AI is even starting to tackle web design, building websites automatically.
That's the ambition of a startup called Flint, which has backing from Sheryl Sandberg, formerly of Facebook Meta.
Okay.
Their goal is to use AI not just to build a website initially, but to autonomously update and maintain it over time.
So if a business changes its products or services,
The AI would theoretically update the website automatically, reflecting those changes, without needing a human web developer to go in and manually code or redesign things. It aims to automate the constant evolution of a company's online presence.
that could disrupt a whole industry if it works well. Now, with all this AI spreading everywhere, regulators must be getting involved. What's happening in California?
California just passed a new law focused on transparency for consumers,
Transparency about what?
about whether you're interacting with an AI or a human. The law requires companies to clearly disclose when certain AI applications are being used.
Like customer service bots.
Exactly. If you're chatting with customer service or some other interactive system and it's an AI, they now legally have to tell you it's a bot, not a person.
Why is that disclosure considered so important?
It's mainly about preventing deception and building trust. If people don't know they're talking to an AI, it opens the door to manipulation, maybe overly personalized sales pitches that feel human, or just misinformation presented with false authority. It establishes a clear line: human interaction versus artificial interaction.
Okay, makes sense. Now let's shift from digital AI to something more biological. Synthetic biology creating artificial neurons.
Yeah, this is really cool research coming out of UMass Amherst. They're using protein nanowires.
Nanowires made from bacterial protein.
Exactly. Proteins produced by bacteria formed into tiny wires, and they've engineered these nanowires to act like artificial neurons.
Meaning they mimic how real neurons signal.
They emulate the electrical signaling functions of biological neurons pretty closely. And the really key part is they do it at extremely low voltages.
Why is low voltage the key?
Because it means they operate in the same energy range as our own biological cells. This low voltage requirement is crucial if you want these artificial components to interface directly with biological systems.
Ah, so they could potentially connect to living tissue.
That's the long-term vision. It opens doors for things like bio-inspired computers that process information more like a biological brain, and also for next-generation wearable tech.
Wearables powered by what?
Potentially by ambient energy sources. Because they need so little power, you could imagine devices powered just by the body's own heat, or movement, or maybe even chemicals and sweat. Really low-power integrated bioelectronics.
That sounds like science fiction becoming reality. Speaking of which, before we leave this tech segment, we have to touch on the ultimate sci-fi concept, time travel. Is it possible? What does physics say?
Well, physics, specifically Einstein's theory of relativity, does allow for travel forward in time through time dilation. If you travel very, very close to the speed of light, time slows down for you relative to everyone else. So you'd age slower, you'd effectively travel into their future. That's theoretically sound.
Okay, so forward travel, yes, but backward travel, that's the tricky one.
That's the massive hurdle. It seems to require bending the rules of space-time in ways we don't know how to do.
And this is where concepts like the Alcubierre drive come in. The warp drive.
Exactly. Miguel Alcubierre proposed a theoretical model back in the 90s. The idea isn't to travel through space faster than light, which relativity forbids.
Right.
Instead, you'd manipulate space-time itself. You'd create a warp bubble around your ship that contracts space-time in front of you and expands it behind you.
So the ship itself isn't moving faster than light relative to its local bubble, but the bubble carries it across vast distances quickly, like riding a wave.
That's the concept, surfing on a wave of space-time.
Sounds amazing. So why haven't we built one? What's the catch?
The catch is enormous. Two main things. First, the Alcubierre drive requires something called exotic matter with negative mass or negative energy density.
And does that exist?
We've never observed it, and we have no idea how to create it. It might be physically impossible. Second, even if you could get the exotic matter,
yes,
the amount of energy needed to create and sustain that warp bubble is astronomical. We're talking about the equivalent energy of converting an entire star like Jupiter or even the sun completely into energy, maybe more.
Okay, so mathematically interesting, but physically out of reach for the foreseeable future.
Way out of reach, yeah. It's theoretically possible within relativity, but the requirements are currently pure science fiction.
And even if we solved the physics, there's still the paradox problem, isn't there? The grandfather paradox.
Right. If you could go back in time and, say, prevent your own grandparents from meeting, how could you have been born to go back in the first place? It creates logical contradictions.
How do physicists try to resolve that?
Many lean towards something called the Novikov self-consistency principle. It basically suggests that the universe has built-in rules to prevent paradoxes.
Meaning?
Meaning, if you traveled back in time, the laws of physics themselves would somehow conspire to prevent you from changing anything that would lead to a paradox. You might try to alter the past, but circumstances would intervene, ensuring history unfolds exactly as it already did. You could be a witness, but not an agent of change.
So time travel might be possible, but utterly pointless for changing history.
That's one interpretation, yeah. You could observe, but not interfere in any meaningful way that creates a contradiction. Still fascinating, but maybe less dramatic than the movie suggests.
Definitely food for thought. Okay, from the theoretical limits of physics, let's shift gears dramatically now to the very real, very complex world of geopolitics.
Yeah, this is where things get messy. A lot of friction, a lot of competing interests playing out globally.
And the biggest headline seems to be the ceasefire agreement in the Middle East between Israel and Gaza. There were complex negotiations.
Very complex, involving the U.S. President Trump, addressed the Israeli Knesset, actually, calling it a historic dawn, but also key regional players like Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey were heavily involved in brokering the deal.
And the immediate outcome was the release of hostages and detainees.
That's right. A really emotional moment with the return of 20 Israeli hostages who have been held in Gaza. That was obviously huge news, huge relief for the families.
Absolutely. But the other side of that exchange, the release of Palestinian detainees, that seems much more complicated based on our sources.
It is much more complicated and, frankly, quite grim in some aspects. Nearly 2,000 Palestinian detainees were released as part of this agreement.
Okay.
And this is a critical point. 154 of those released individuals were immediately exiled, deported. They are permanently barred from ever returning to their homes, either in Gaza or the West Bank.
Permanently exiled. Why? What's the justification given?
The stated rationale is usually security preventing individuals, particularly those with alleged ties to militant groups, from rejoining those groups or posing a future threat. But the impact?
It creates statelessness, potentially. Rips families apart.
Exactly. It creates a population of forced exiles, deepens grievances, and potentially sows seeds for future instability in the region, even as it resolves the immediate hostage crisis. It's a very harsh measure layered onto the release.
And adding to the complexity, there are also serious allegations about how detainees were treated before release.
Yes, and it's important we report this impartially. The sources include harrowing accounts, notably from an American journalist, Noah Avishag Schnall, who was detained herself.
What did she allege?
She described conditions of extreme brutality by Israeli guards during her detention. Her account details physical beatings and, very disturbingly, explicit threats of sexual violence made against detainees.
That's horrific.
It is, and it underscores the critical need for independent oversight and accountability regarding the treatment of all detainees, even amidst diplomatic breakthroughs. These human rights concerns are incredibly serious and can't be overlooked.
A very difficult situation. Okay, let's shift focus to the economic arena, specifically the U.S.-China relationship. The trade war seems to be heating up again. Tariffs.
It's definitely escalating. We're seeing a new round of tit-for-tat measures that impact global trade flows directly.
Like what specifically?
Both the U.S. and China have imposed reciprocal port fees on each other's shipping companies, basically making it more expensive for ships from the other country to dock and unload.
What does that mean for consumers or businesses?
Higher shipping costs. And those costs eventually get passed down the line, meaning potentially higher prices for imported goods, everything from electronics to clothing to furniture. It adds friction to the whole global supply chain.
And it's not just port fees, right? The U.S. also put new tariffs on specific goods.
Yes. New U.S. tariffs were imposed on imported timber and furniture from China. The duties are quite high, ranging from 10% up to 50%.
Why timber and furniture? What's the goal?
The stated goal is to protect American manufacturers in those sectors from what the U.S. government views as unfair competition, often linked to Chinese state subsidies. But again, the immediate effect for American consumers could be significantly higher prices for things like home furnishings, and potentially even increased costs for building or renovating homes.
Okay, so that's the U.S. move. How did China respond? Did they target similar consumer goods?
China's retaliation was a bit more targeted, focusing less on broad consumer categories and more on specific companies in strategic sectors.
Such as?
They imposed sanctions on the U.S. subsidiaries of Hanwha Ocean, which is a major South Korean shipbuilder. But perhaps more significantly, the backdrop to this is China's control over rare earth minerals.
Ah, the critical minerals needed for high-tech manufacturing.
Exactly. And U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently came out with some very strong language condemning China's use of export controls on these rare earths. He called it a reflection of a Leninist business model.
Leninist business model. That's loaded terminology. What exactly does he mean by that in this context?
He's referring to a system where the state, the government, maintains very tight strategic control over critical industries and resources like rare earths, which are vital for everything from smartphones and EVs to advanced weapon systems.
Okay.
Unlike a free market approach, this Leninist model, as Bessent frames it, allows the state to use its control over these essential supply chains not just for economic benefit, but as a tool of political leverage. A weapon, essentially.
So restricting exports to pressure other countries.
Precisely. Bessent's warning was that while this might offer short-term leverage, weaponizing supply chains like this ultimately damages global trust. It forces other countries to pour resources into finding alternative sources and building their own supply chains.
Which could eventually undermine China's dominance in that sector.
That's the argument. It could backfire economically in the long run by accelerating the move away from reliance on China for these critical materials.
Interesting dynamic. And this fight over technology and strategic resources ties directly into European security concerns, doesn't it? MI5 in the UK issued a major warning.
A really stark, extraordinary public warning, as the sources described it. MI5, Britain's domestic intelligence agency, directly alerted members of parliament MPs that they are being actively and systematically targeted by espionage.
Targeted by whom?
Primarily state-sponsored actors from China, Russia, and Iran.
And how are they being targeted? What methods?
A whole range of techniques. Sophisticated phishing attacks to steal login credentials and sensitive data, attempts at blackmail using compromised information, and efforts to cultivate relationships with MPs or their staff to gain influence or access. It's a full-spectrum threat.
Wow. And this climate of fear about foreign influence over critical technology, it led to a pretty drastic move in the Netherlands, seizing a chip company.
A genuinely unprecedented move. The Dutch government invoked an emergency law for the very first time to take direct control over the operations of a company called Nexperia.
Nexperia. What do they make, and who owns them?
They're a major producer of essential semiconductor components, basic but vital chips, and Nexperia is owned by a Chinese company, Wingtech Technology.
So the Dutch government seized a Chinese-owned chip maker, citing national security risks. What were the specific fears?
The core concerns were multifaceted. Risk of sensitive technology leaking to China, potential forced transfer of intellectual property, and critically, the worry that the supply of these essential chips, which go into everything from cars to industrial equipment to potentially military gear within the EU, could be disrupted or manipulated by Beijing for geopolitical leverage.
Similar to the rare earth concerns.
Very similar logic, yeah. And this wasn't out of the blue. Sources indicate there was pressure behind the scenes for months. U.S. officials had reportedly warned the Dutch government that Nexperia's Chinese CEO needed to be replaced. Otherwise, the company might end up on a U.S. trade blacklist, the Entity List.
So the seizure was a culmination of these mounting security concerns.
Exactly. It's a prime example of how semiconductors and critical technologies have become central battlegrounds in this new era of geopolitical competition and national security focus.
Okay, shifting quickly to wrap up this segment. Political instability seems to be a theme, too. Ukraine first. President Zelensky is looking vulnerable in recent polls.
According to a poll from Rate 1, a pollster based in Kyiv, yes. In a hypothetical head-to-head matchup, former Armed Forces Chief Valery Zaluzhny actually polled significantly ahead of President Zelensky.
What were the numbers?
Zaluzhny reportedly had 42.6% support, compared to 26.3% for Zelensky in that specific scenario.
That's a big gap. But elections aren't actually possible right now because of martial law, are they?
Correct. Under the current martial law in Ukraine, presidential elections cannot be held. And technically, Zelensky's official presidential term expired last year. This is a point often raised by critics, including President Trump, to question the current government's mandate, although the Constitutional Court has affirmed the situation under martial law. It adds a layer of political uncertainty.
Understood. And in Madagascar, the political situation seems much more volatile. A potential coup.
It escalated very quickly. It started with large protests, primarily led by a youth group called Gen Z 212.
Protesting what?
Widespread anger over deep-seated issues. Poverty, government corruption, and especially chronic, crippling power shortages that have really hammered the economy and daily life.
And the protests led to?
They grew intense enough that President Andry Rajoelina reportedly fled the capital city, Antananarivo. Following his departure, the military announced it was taking control, dissolving government institutions.
So, a military takeover driven by popular unrest.
That appears to be the situation. A new military-led regime seems to be forming in the wake of severe public discontent and the president fleeing. A very unstable situation. Okay, let's look at the broader economy, the environment, and even dip back into history. And the economy starts with this year's Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences.
Right, awarded to 3 economists, Joel Mossier, Philippe Aghion, and Peter Howitt. And their work was on creative destruction.
Exactly, that famous concept, originally from Schumpeter, but they really developed the modern understanding of it. The idea that economic progress happens through a constant process where new technologies and innovations destroy old industries and ways of doing things, creating new ones in their place.
Like the internet disrupting traditional media, or EVs challenging gasoline cars.
Perfect examples. It's the engine of long-term growth, but it can also be disruptive and painful in the short term.
And apparently, one of the laureates, Philippe Aghion, had a warning tied to this. About Europe.
He did. Right alongside accepting the prize, he issued a pretty stark warning that Europe is falling behind. Badly.
Falling behind whom?
Behind the U.S. and China, specifically in the global technology race. He argues Europe's innovation engine is sputtering compared to the dynamism in North America and East Asia.
And what does he blame for this lag?
He points directly at excessive government regulation and bureaucratic red tape, particularly rules put in place since the 1990s. He feels they stifle risk-taking, slow down investment, and generally prevent that necessary creative destruction process from happening efficiently.
So, too much protection for old industries, not enough room for the new ones to break through.
That's his argument. He believes Europe needs to significantly reduce these regulatory burdens to become competitive again, even if it means allowing inefficient firms to fail more quickly to free up resources for innovators. He sees the current approach as overly cautious and ultimately self-defeating in the global tech race.
Interesting perspective from a Nobel winner. Now shifting from long-term tech trends to immediate market chaos. Silver prices went wild.
Absolutely wild. Historic surge. Silver hit an all-time high price in London, trading 52.5868 an ounce.
$52. What drove that massive spike? Just inflation fears.
Inflation fears are part of it, but the sources point more specifically to serious market liquidity problems and a classic squeeze.
A squeeze, like someone trying to corner the market, like the Hunt brothers back in the 80s?
It has echoes of that, yes. The squeeze seems driven by intense demand for physical silver, combined with a reluctance of those holding the metal to lend it out.
Why would they not want to lend it?
Fear. Fear about the stability of banks, fear about the long-term value of paper currencies. Investors are scrambling for hard assets, safe havens. And a key indicator here was the silver lease rate, the interest rate charged to borrow physical silver.
What happened to the lease rate?
It reportedly spiked to over 30% for a one-month loan. That's astronomical. It signals that owners of physical silver are demanding a huge premium to part with it, even temporarily. It points to a real physical shortage, meaning massive speculative buying pressure. Some analysts are even talking about silver potentially hitting $100 an ounce if this continues.
Wow. Real turmoil in a usually quieter market. Okay, let's turn now to the planet itself. Some really worrying news about environmental tipping points being reached. Coral reefs first.
Yeah, it's just devastating news. The research confirms what scientists have feared. Warm water coral reefs, globally, have effectively crossed a critical thermal tipping point.
A tipping point, meaning irreversible change.
Largely, yes. The estimate is that the tipping point was around 1.2 degrees Celsius of global warming above pre-industrial levels, and we're currently already at about 1.3 to 1.4 degrees. We've passed it.
And the consequence of passing that 1.2 degree mark is?
More frequent and severe mass bleaching events due to heat stress. The coral just can't recover between these events anymore. The study states flatly that about half of the world's warm water coral cover is already gone.
Half gone. The impact of that must be enormous for coastal communities, fisheries.
It's an existential crisis for hundreds of millions of people who depend directly on reefs for food, for protection from storm surges, for their livelihoods through tourism. Without drastic, immediate global action on emissions, the science suggests the total collapse of these vital ecosystems is now almost inevitable. It's incredibly grim.
Truly sobering. And it's not just reefs. Efforts to stop deforestation, they're also failing, despite all the pledges.
Failing badly, according to a major assessment by NGOs. Get this, in 2021 alone, the world lost 8.1 million hectares of forest.
8.1 million hectares? How big is that?
Roughly the size of England, lost in a single year.
Unbelievable. After all the agreements at climate summits like COP26.
It shows those pledges aren't translating into effective action on the ground, or at least not nearly fast enough. The primary drivers haven't changed.
Which are?
Still overwhelmingly agricultural expansion, clearing forests for cattle ranching, primarily beef, and for soy cultivation, often used for animal feed. And increasingly, massive wildfires are also a huge factor, made worse by drought and climate change, particularly in places like the Amazon.
So promises made, but forests still disappearing at an alarming rate.
That's the reality, unfortunately.
And sometimes even when governments try to do the right thing environmentally, it can go wrong. There's a UK example.
Yeah, this is a real case study in good intentions versus poor execution.
Yeah.
The UK government ran several large schemes to insulate homes, aiming to improve energy efficiency, cut carbon emissions, and lower heating bills for residents.
Sounds like a good idea. What went wrong?
The implementation was disastrous in many cases. A watchdog report found that tens of thousands of homes insulated under these schemes now need urgent, costly repairs.
Repairs for what?
Severe dampness and mold problems caused by shoddy installation work, lack of proper ventilation considerations, and inadequate oversight of the contractors doing the work.
So the insulation trapped moisture instead of saving energy?
In many cases, yes, leading to unhealthy living conditions, potential respiratory problems for residents, and huge repair bills. Billions of pounds were spent, and instead of benefits, it created new, serious problems for thousands of households. A classic example of policy failure in the execution phase.
What a mess. Okay, let's end this deep dive by looking back, way back. Two interesting archaeological finds that tell us something about cultural change. First, Poland, about 1,000 years ago.
Right, a discovery at a medieval cemetery in Poland. It sheds light on how Christianization actually happened on the ground.
What did they find?
They found graves that clearly followed the new Christian burial customs, bodies oriented east-west. No cremation like the earlier pagan traditions. But many of these Christian-style graves also contain traditional pagan grave goods, things like weapons buried with warriors, jewelry, maybe ritual items.
So people were adopting the Christian burial rite, but still including elements of their older pagan beliefs. Suggests a blend, not a clean break.
Exactly. It challenges the simple narrative of a sudden, uniform conversion. It shows a much more complex transitional period where people were likely adopting Christianity for social or political reasons, but their deep-seated cultural beliefs about death and the afterlife, rooted in paganism, persisted and were integrated into the new practices. It paints a much richer picture of that cultural shift.
Fascinating complexity. And the second find, even older, from the Czech Republic, Celtic coins.
Yeah, an amazing find in western Bohemia. A large hoard of gold and silver Celtic coins, dating back about 2,500 years.
A hoard like buried treasure.
Well, it might have been buried for safekeeping, but the nature of the hoard, the sheer number and variety of coins, suggests something more. Archaeologists think that site might have been a significant seasonal marketplace or a major trading center for the Celts in that region.
So not just a settlement, but a place where people came together specifically to trade.
That's the interpretation. It gives us really valuable clues about the economy, the trade networks, and the social structures of these ancient Celtic societies in Central Europe. Coins are like little data points, and a hoard like this provides a wealth of information about their commercial life and cultural interactions long ago. #tag outro.
So wrapping it all up, what a journey today. From, the intricate workings of our own cells and brains.
Right, finding those pain-killing neurons, growing stem cells.
All the way out to Starship tests, the physics of time travel, the sheer density of satellites above us. And the contrast is really the story, isn't it? You see this incredible acceleration in human ingenuity, our ability to understand and manipulate the world, the body, technology.
We're building custom AI chips needing gigawatts of power. We're genuinely planning for Mars. We're finding ways to potentially regenerate brain tissue.
The potential feels almost limitless in some areas.
But then you smash right back into the old realities. The stubborn inertia of geopolitics.
Yeah, the trade wars based on national interest, the rare earth minerals being used as leverage.
The seizure of tech companies over security fears, the deep complexities and human cost in places like Gaza, the political instability in Ukraine or Madagascar.
It feels like even as we reach for the stars, our feet are still firmly planted in these age-old conflicts and competitions. The Leninist business model versus creative destruction.
Exactly. The future is arriving incredibly fast, but the present is still shaped so powerfully by the past.
Which brings us to that final thought we'd like to leave you with. Today we heard that critical ecosystems, like the world's warm water coral reefs, have already crossed their thermal tipping point. Irreversible change triggered by just 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming.
A relatively small number, globally speaking, leading to system collapse. So the question for you to ponder is this. If natural systems can face such definitive, irreversible tipping points from seemingly gradual changes,
how quickly do our human systems, the political systems, the economic systems we discussed, the ones driving trade wars and tech races, need to adapt? How much pressure can they take before they hit an irreversible tipping point?
what is the geopolitical equivalent of that 1.2 degrees? What's the threshold for global stability that we should be watching for, perhaps much more closely than we currently are, given the tensions we've outlined today?
Something profound to consider as you go about your day. Thanks, as always, for diving deep with us.
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.